Hi there, I'm the Dark Ranger, and here you find me in beautiful Monument Valley, Arizona. Not really. Of course, that is Monument Valley, as you can plainly see, and that's also me, but it's just that I'm not really there. Here's the thing. I don't have a good enough video camera to be able to show you the real constellations live, so I'm starting a new kind of Dark Ranger demo called Constellation Contemplation, where you're going to see some still images, and I'm going to do my best to try and provide you some lively narration along the way. Do you recognize the constellation behind me? Of course you do. Everybody knows Orion. But did you know that it also has over 1,000 different names? Or at least it used to. Not only is this the brightest constellation, but it stays near enough to the equator that cultures in both the northern and southern hemisphere can all get a good look at Orion. And since, pretty much the dawn of time, all these different people have told stories about that constellation. Unfortunately, as cultures die off, so too do their stories. And while a special kind of anthropologists known as archaeoastronomers have done a pretty good job of documenting many of these stories before they went extinct, a critical question remains. What has the best chance of immortalizing these stories? The written word or the authentic visual aids, the very stars themselves? Consider this. Long after humanity fades from existence, assuming, we can't beat the odds of evolution's average expiration date for any species, these stars will still be blazing brightly. Well, maybe not Betelgeuse. Do you see the great big red one there? It might blow itself to smithereens before humanity can do the same. But here's the immediate irony. If we don't start taking light pollution seriously, and, stop letting it vandalize the beauty of our night sky, we're going to kill off those last few remaining star stories. And that's tonight's Constellation Contemplation. Fading visuals, dying stories. Though there are many constellations in the sky, realize that even within a single culture, most constellations have several different stories. What you see behind me is just, let me move over here. Now you can see Orion better. What you see behind me is just the southwestern section of the sky and its Greek and Roman constellations, as they've been standardized by the International Astronomical Union. Yeah, those are the same people who killed Pluto, in case you recognize the name. Keep in mind that over time, thousands of different cultures across the planet have filled their night skies with stories. All of these people, all that time, that's a lot of different stories. Now, it has been said that technically there are 3 stages of death. First, there's the point at which your body ceases to live. The second stage of death is when you are buried or cremated and no longer can anybody see your body. But the third and final stage of death is when your name is spoken for the very last time. The ancients didn't put their stories in the sky because they lacked a written language. Many of them had that. Nor did they use the sky because there wasn't enough room to put all those stories in the back of their caves. They intentionally put them in the sky, knowing that because everybody would always be able to see those stars, that they would keep saying those names, and by extension, their stories would be guaranteed immortality. Yet now, thousands of years later, we are giving all those stories their third deaths, and for no good reason. Indeed, one of the most pointless reasons of all, light pollution. As a Dark Ranger, I think I spend less time actually studying the night sky compared to the amount of time I spend trying to figure out the psychology that makes people reluctant to do a better job of managing their light. The one thing I'm confident about is I think that the constellations themselves and those stories they help tell are probably the best justification for protecting the night sky. Certainly when you can see them in their full glory in a place like Bryce Canyon, where they brag about being the darkest sky in North America accessible by a paved road. And how do you measure darkness? Well, you use something called the limiting magnitude scale. In a place like Bryce Canyon, it rates out as 7.0. Now, what that means for most people is that it's very easy, as you look into the northern sky, to be able to pick out the Big Dipper. But then it's also easy to realize that the Big Dipper is not a constellation in and of itself, but it belongs to this larger constellation known as Ursa Major. And the Latin translation there is Big Bear, but going to the stories, many times it's Big Mama Bear. And you can see pretty plainly from Big Mama Bear's tail, which is a little bit weird, but there's a story to explain why she has a long tail, that she also, on the other side of the Dipper, she has a head with a pointed nose, just like a bear should. You can also notice 2 hind legs and 2 front legs, and look how the hind legs are longer than the front legs. Well, there's not too many animals in the animal kingdom that have that kind of leg arrangement, but certainly a bear would be one. And also in the same vicinity is the baby bear, or technically a constellation known as Ursa Minor. And what the baby bear is famous for is at the end of his, also strangely long tail, is the star Polaris. And all the stars, because Polaris just happens to be over the North Pole, rotate underneath that fixed point. And again, that makes sense for a lot of stories because it's easy to imagine a great big protective mama bear wanting to stay close to her baby as together they wander through the night sky. Even in a place like Acadia National Park, the sky is sufficiently dark, so again, it's very easy to find the Big Dipper among the other stars and to make out the bear's head again and legs as well. And once you've found that, it's not too hard to be able to make your way further into the northern portion of the sky to pick out the baby bear. But I worry about places like Yosemite National Park, places that are famous for doing a good job of protecting the natural world, places that people intentionally go so they can pass on stewardship values from one generation to the next, because I worry about the night sky. It's very difficult to protect the night sky, even in a national park where all their rules and regulations, they only begin and end at the park boundaries, and of course you can't fence out that light pollution. And what I specifically worry about is I worry about a grandfather and, maybe a couple of grandsons or granddaughters making that first investment, the investment of time and maybe a little bit of money to buy themselves a guide to the night sky, and they walk out away from the campfire and they look up and they try to find what should be there. Well, they probably won't have any difficulty finding the Big Dipper in a 6.0 limiting magnitude sky, but it might be a little bit harder for them to make out that that's supposed to be a big bear. And then when they look for that little bear, it's going to be very hard for them to see a bear at all. They'll see something like a little dipper, and maybe while they're thinking bear, they'll think, hey, that looks like Davy Crockett's hat. And pretty soon, then, that story might erode through these generational transitions because, they could naturally think that maybe the big bear is the bear that Davy Crockett killed when he was only 3. And then at some point, if this story continues to fall apart, somebody's going to need a Latin name for that, and they might call this Procyon capellos or something for coonskin hat. And as the sky continues to get brighter, places like the Wasatch Front, semi-urban environment, well, you might be able to get the Big Dipper okay from the sky. But does it look like a bear anymore? It's some other bizarre object, and then maybe somebody with imagination might see that as being like a squid in the sky. And now we need a Latin name like Calamari resistorus. And what I mean here is perhaps a little bit of Jules Verne influence, where the story might change to be the story of Captain Nemo's submarine, the Nautilus, being attacked by that famous giant squid. And then, of course, this weird pattern above it, well, what could that be? It would have to be a harpoon. Maybe the harpoon that Ned Land heroically used to protect Captain Nemo and drive that marauding squid away. And while that's a great story in itself, indeed one of my favorites, it's not the original story. It's not the story that's been told for thousands and thousands of years across even different cultures about those bears in the sky. And this is Los Angeles, an urban sky. Even if you were to drive all the way up to the top of Mount Wilson, where they've got that old observatory up there, if you were to try to look across all that light pollution, you're not going to see anything that looks like Mama Bear. you're not even going to see anything that you would recognize as the Big Dipper. At best, you're going to get a bent line in the sky. And what compelling star story could you possibly tell with that lame of a visual aid? I guess maybe if you had the misfortune of locking your car keys in your car, then maybe you could say that this is the shape that you bent a coat hanger into in a failed attempt to unlock your car. But what about Baby Bear? Well, he's completely gone, and all that's left of even the Little Dipper is just 2 stars. What are you going to do with 2 stars? I mean, you can draw a line between them, but then what? I don't know, maybe you could finish your little lockout melodrama about how eventually a nice police officer came along and that this is the Slim Jim that she used to unlock your car, and then you were able to drive home and, live happily ever after or whatever. But here's my point. As we keep losing these stars, we're losing some of the best stories ever told. Stories that, because they were so good, they have the ability to teach our children and our grandchildren and our grandchildren's grandchildren, teach them who we are, or at least who we should try to become. These stories have seen us through our greatest triumphs as a species, and, not to confuse the issue too much, but dare I say, through our darkest hours. And if we lose these, what have we lost? Well, maybe once we've forgotten where we've come from, wouldn't that make it even harder trying to figure out where we should be going? I've tried to argue this many times before, and some people have literally laughed in my face, saying, "You've got to be kidding me. We need those Greek and Roman stories about as badly as we need Roman numerals. And besides, if anybody ever really needed to know who Orion was, they could just watch a movie." Does that seem right to you? It certainly doesn't seem right to me, especially because I've done my homework. And according to the film industry, Orion is already forgotten. I did a search for characters with the exact name of Orion on the International Movie Database, and here's what I found. In the cartoon superheroes, there's this guy named Orion who joins the Hall of Justice, but he's more like a Flash Gordon kind of character. There's these independent films that are awful, or at least worse than anything on my YouTube channel, and yet somehow they made it on IMDb. There's a couple of romance kind of teenager stories. One's a cartoon television show as told by Ginger that one of her romantic interests is a guy named Orion. There's the Teenage Girls in Space, Xenon, the sequel, kind of for teens program with a character named Orion. The Dead Country is a movie about space zombies attacking us with somebody named Orion in it. There's this video game that's something I might want to play. You actually attack and kill evil corporations. That sounds pretty good. But only in Disney's television show version of their cartoon movie Hercules does anything similar to the historic Orion appear. And it's only once in 71 episodes from a show about Greek and Roman mythology. And apparently Disney didn't put all that much effort in this particular episode. Notice it's 3.4 out of 10-star rating, though Craig Ferguson does Orion's lines, so that's got to be pretty good. It's episode 30, by the way, season 1, in case you want to check it out. But you might ask the question, why would Disney do 71 episodes of Hercules if Greek and Roman stories weren't needed, weren't important? I think we do need to preserve our sky stories, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. I think there are a lot of people out there that aren't willing to let these stories die. And they'd love to help save the sky, they just need a little help getting started. Pointed in the right direction. One of the easiest things you could do would be to remember to close your blinds at night and trap your light inside where you're actually using it. Try it. You'd be surprised how much darker it keeps the outside world. The next thing you'd want to do is replace your outside lights with a full cutoff motion sensor lights so that they only come on when you need them, and when they're on, they keep all that light pointed downward. Pretty soon your neighbors will notice, and once they hear how much you're saving on your power bill, they're going to follow your lead. And once you get a few of your neighbors helping you save the stars, well, then maybe it's time to exercise your democratic rights. Some of that good old-fashioned civic engagement stuff, that stuff we learned from those star lovers, the Greeks and Romans. Imagine what a lighting ordinance would do for a city like Los Angeles. Let's say they managed to reduce their lights pollution by 50%. Then suddenly, not only would they have Orion back, but they'd be able to see those dippers plainly, a sky almost as good as Yosemite National Park. But what if, being so inspired by that first accomplishment, they, the citizens of Los Angeles, decide to reduce their lights by another 50%? Well then, Mama Bear and Baby Bear would be back, because they would have a night sky almost as beautiful as that of Acadia National Park. I don't think this is an impossible dream. For this very summer, 2013, Paris, France will be implementing the first lighting ordinance of a multi-million population city. And I'm pretty sure, even under the Eiffel Tower, Parisians will again be able to see les casseroles, which is what they call the dippers, the baking pans. And that tells you a lot about their culture right there. Always about the food, the French. Rameau l'intime regime Paris. And so, of course, I doubly wish them well. If anybody can set a good example for the planet, it would be Paris. Comme il va de Paris, ainsi va le monde. Take a long look at that picture. That, again, is what LA could look like. And doesn't that seem right to you? Take a long look at this picture. Isn't this something beautiful enough to fight for? If that seems like a future you'd be willing to strive for, to help make become a reality, then you too need to become a Dark Ranger. Look us up on Facebook. I am the Dark Ranger. All one word, no apostrophe. And if by all means you see something you like, make sure you like our page so you can find us easily enough again. And more importantly, that way we'll be able to find you, so we can ask for your help in restoring the stars to the sky, and to help us tell these wonderful stories that they represent. Oh, I nearly forgot. Are you still wondering about those bears and how they got those long tails? Curious as to who Orion really was? What about the Orion of the Navajo, the people of the desert Southwest, better known as Dene? Their Orion was known as the first thin one, or coyote feather. Do you want to know more about him? Then you really need to like us on Facebook, where we will be sure to tell you about these characters, their star stories, and many, many more. In the meantime, may darkness always follow you. The Dark Ranger blessing.